Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the final online meeting of the Rapid Rehousing for Youth Learning Community. We're so glad to have you all here today. Just a reminder to minimize background noise. All lines will be muted except for speakers. Throughout the webinar, you can post your questions for speakers and provider panelists in the box on the right of your screen. And our agenda for today will be just a quick overview again of the goals of the Rapid Rehousing for Youth Learning Community. We're going to have a great presentation from Larry Cohen of Point Source Youth about their program. We'll also be hearing from some of our experienced Rapid Rehousing for Youth providers about their key recommendations and lessons learned relating to Rapid Rehousing for Youth. And those providers include Julie Bock from Pathfinders in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Jody Jackson from Heartland Family Service in Omaha, Nebraska, John Lawlor from The Connection in Middletown, Connecticut, and Kathy Tillotson from Build Futures in Huntington Beach, California. And as always, we'll have a Q&A session with the providers and panelists after their lessons learned. And finally, I'm going to provide just some of my own thoughts about the Rapid Rehousing for Youth Learning Community and Rapid Rehousing for Youth in general. And we'll also talk about next steps for our community. Again, we have joining us today Larry Cohen of Point Source Youth, who is going to tell us about Point Source's work to create effective systems change in communities around the country, of which Rapid Rehousing is a key part. We'll also be hearing from those expert youth Rapid Rehousing providers that I mentioned earlier. And as always, we like to start the conversation by focusing on our goals for creating this learning community, which were to improve knowledge and understanding of Rapid Rehousing as an effective model for ending youth homelessness. We want to increase the understanding of best youth Rapid Rehousing practices and learn how to improve our systems approach to implementing Rapid Rehousing for youth. And now we're just going to jump right in with today's presentations. First, we're so happy to have Larry Cohen, President of Point Source Youth, here today. He's going to tell us about Point Source's incredible work on creating systems responses to youth homelessness that are rooted in 3 effective interventions: host homes, family intervention work, and most importantly for our purposes today, Rapid Rehousing for Youth. So Larry, take it away and tell us about your work.
Great. Well, thank you, Mindy. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks, Jen, as well. And it's so nice to speak to everyone on the phone today. Yes, we'll be talking about Point Source Youth and our work in Minneapolis, and then our plans for working in future cities, and the 3 interventions that Mindy just highlighted will be the focus of our conversation. So we go to the next slide. So what Point Source Youth does, well, we're a national organization founded a little over a year and a half ago, and since then have launched our first project in Minneapolis. Our mission is to work in 50 cities in less than 10 years, so we're already finished year 1, so we have 9 years left, in order to empower local communities to scale up successful interventions to better serve homeless youth, and to use those interventions as a catalyst for systems change. What Point Source Youth does is provide best practices, knowledge sharing, and project management and coordination around those interventions, as well as advice and access to funding to scale up those interventions, working both with the local community and as well as with our national partners, in order to make sure that everyone is on the same page with the success stories and best practices about rapid rehousing, short-term host homes, shelter diversion, and mental health services to support youth and extended family and chosen family. And then most importantly, the cities then mentor the other cities. So what we're seeing is in local communities having access to other communities that have successfully implemented the work is really helpful, as I think we've all seen as part of this learning collaborative that the Alliance has been so great in organizing. And then the last component is to publish and make transparent how each city works. So in order to do that, we'll be doing formative evaluations so that we know how the city has implemented the solutions, how they came together, how youth were served, and that's published right away. And then secondly, we'll be measuring outcomes over 2 years over 6 modalities so that we can then see how those interventions affect the lives of youth. So we can go to the next slide now. So I think the evaluation and data, as well as, of course, the project management and best practice work is all really key. But just some more information about the evaluation work. It's being led by App Associates together with the Williams Institute at UCLA. And that's because LGBTQ youth are a special focus of our work since they're such an overrepresented part of the population. And then James Shelton at Hunter College is going to be leading all of the qualitative work and formative evaluations, as well as focus groups. And then we also have some great evaluation advisors who are working on best practice evaluation, but as well as cost modeling, so that we can show how these solutions are potentially cost-effective as compared to other solutions or usual care. And so those are Dennis Culhane at University of Pennsylvania and Paul Toro at Wayne State University. So those advisors will be working on, again, the 2 components, the focus groups and interviews in each city, and as well as using administrative data to publish how the solutions are working and how we can learn and lessons learned from each city, informative evaluations, and then the data instrument to measure baseline as compared to that over a 2-year period, measuring 6 different modalities, which we'll get to soon to share what those are. Great. So as Mindy mentioned, the 3 interventions are now in one of our next cities, which is New York City. We're launching a 4th. Have been selected because these are, I guess people on the phone here are a little bit biased to rapid rehousing, which is great. So these are solutions that, for lack of a better word, work and that can scale up. Right? So family strengthening work is really mental health services that are for youth or family together or separate, and there are really good examples of that working. The Boys and Girls Club of Calgary, Eva's House in Toronto, our great partner Reclaim in Minneapolis, and these are solutions that can scale. I mean, hiring mental health providers who, if a state is a Medicaid state, can be billed to Medicaid, is a scalable solution and one that we think will have very strong outcomes. The second one is short-term host homes as shelter diversion and as respite housing. Because while youth is waiting for rapid rehousing, which even in a 30-day goal, you still have a 30-day period. Where should that youth go? And we're seeing that scaling up short-term host homes could be a good answer. So they're not only having a shelter option, and even if there is a shelter, there's probably a waiting list, so that there's new capacity to have flow through in the system and have new places for youth to stay. So the shelter diversion has some good examples. So Point Source Youth is also working with these partners in order to leverage the best practice work. So DePaul in the UK has 500 host homes available every night, including 60 in London, which is a high-cost place. So they have shown that is possible, as well as Latin American Youth Center, which is mostly for younger youth, and of course our partner Avenues for homeless youth in Minneapolis. And then rapid rehousing, of course, with tailored youth-directed services. But we're seeing in cities that if we work with cities locally, including communities that have not implemented rapid rehousing before, for example, New York City, we can help providers kind of debunk myths around rapid rehousing, plug them into lots of examples that we've heard on this learning community, encourage them to apply to COCs, and work with those COC heads to, again, debunk those myths so that they know there are these best practices of, 24 months, not 3 months. Youth are different from adults, and other, kind of misnomers that keep coming up, like my insurance is going to go up because I require 24/7 monitoring of youth, to really helping both providers and COCs kind of get to the path of rapid rehousing to increase capacity, as well as having effective solutions. And actually, New York City, one of our great partners, really encouraged us to help them with the job training piece, so that youth have a living wage in order to then pay for that rapid rehousing unit over that 2-year period, or when that 2-year period ends. We are working on that now. For example, in New York City, there's a program called Periscolas, for youth who are actually particularly good at math and problem solving. And after a 6-month training, they then give them a computer programming job at $38,000 a year. So just kind of one example of plugging into some newer job training programs that are not just the resume building, / GED core work, which is great work being done, but kind of a next step on that. And again, the measurement and evaluation, so that we're then publishing out, how a high-cost city like New York implements rapid rehousing for the first time for youth, and having each city then publish, so we can have those lessons learned to share with all of the communities in the U.S. You can go to the next one, Mindy. So again, they're scalable solutions, but they're intertwined and integrated. So we'll go on one of our further slides in the presentation about how they end up being coordinated. So no, that's fine, Mindy. We can go to the next one. So again, the goal is 50 cities in 10 years. And our roadmap is we launched in Minneapolis. It took about 8 months worth of planning to get to a March launch, but that's still pretty fast. So it shows that in 8 months we could bring a community together in order to launch the solutions. And now we're working for next year, right around the corner now, to launch in 3 to 4 additional cities. So New York City, Baltimore, Hartford, and others. And then adding 4 cities in 2018 and 5 cities in 2019. So there's a keen opportunity for anyone on the phone who knows of a community that's interested in launching these 3 solutions. We'll be happy to talk about working with them. And that's our mission at Point Source Youth. So we can go to the next slide. So in Minneapolis, we chose Minneapolis because we found really amazing providers, and it was a great city to model the best practices on. And I think it shows that in 8 months we could bring providers together, work with the MCOC, and then scale up solutions to really increase capacity to better serve youth. You can go to the next slide. And so this is, a little bit small, but we can kind of walk through it. So this is showing, how the 3 providers come together for the 3 different solutions. So again, mental health services, the rapid rehousing for housing, and the short-term host homes. So on the top left, there's referrals into the program from different sources, and they all go to an access point of the 3 providers who are all trained on, how to then screen youth. So there's an initial screening application, and then in Minneapolis we're using the TAY VI SPDAT in order to assess need. And then there's joint case conferencing amongst the 3 providers, and the case manager meets with the youth. And something that we've learned is youth choice also becomes really key. So we've had some youth where you would think that rapid rehousing would be a great first step for them, but they've sometimes elected to do a short-term host home first, because just getting a lease and dealing with living alone as a first step seemed overwhelming. So they were able to stay with a host for 1 to 3 months, and then have rapid rehousing as a subsequent intervention. But again, it's youth-driven, so other youth can go straight to rapid rehousing. And then the best practice of the mental health supports we've learned is, the mental health counselor here at Reclaim meets with youth. They're also very flexible, so they can meet with youth at their apartment or someplace near them. and then gets them plugged into that intervention as the combination of those three. We go to the next slide. So some of the lessons learned of implementing the rapid rehousing piece in particular, but as well as the others, is so this was an LGBTQ pilot. One of our mental health providers really was specialized in that area, and because there's such a lack of resources in Minneapolis for that community, it was a great place to start. And so, some of the housing that they've had and programs actually were defunded a couple years ago. So this is one of the first housing programs specific to LGBTQ youth. So the Youth Advisory Board was really key, and they recommended, some specific things like drug and alcohol policies, even using housing first. It was important to have some guidelines there that the youth helped develop. They also have a gender and sexual identity support group that they recommended that's meeting twice per month. And then also we, kind of obvious, but we determined youth choice was really key, so we didn't have to kind of engineer how to predict, which youth gets a host home first versus rapid rehousing first, that, once youth were qualified for the program, youth choice was a key lesson learned about how to define the best combination of those interventions. And then there's weekly case conferencing with the case managers of each of the three providers, so Avenues for Homeless Youth, Reclaim, and the Link, to coordinate and really work with that youth in a well-coordinated fashion. So as we move forward, we'll be publishing the formative evaluation of Minneapolis, and then each of the outcomes over the 6 modalities measured every six months. But we are looking to further define how rapid rehousing, short-term host homes, and family strengthening best integrate into current systems of care. So how does rapid rehousing scale up versus other types of housing programs, and how can short-term host homes, for example, be scaled up versus shelter or in conjunction? And how do we see utilization of the programs differ for different youth ages, for different youth experience with homelessness, and how do those potentially impact outcomes over a 2-year period? And then what are the best practices for scaling these programs up? So you can imagine with short-term host homes, host recruiting is one of those key things. And you can imagine in other cities like New York City, having landlord engagement for rapid rehousing could be a key issue. So, and what are some of the strategies and the best practices about scaling up those solutions? Go to the next slide. And so, we mentioned the evaluation component. So in addition to the formative evaluation, we'll be having the youth taking surveys every 6 months. So the Youth Advisory Board was also key in creating that survey. So for example, the first version of the survey was pretty long, and they really gave us that feedback that they thought it was a little bit on the intrusive side for some of the questions, so that was really helpful to enable our research team to go back and really identify which questions were most salient to get the right data without necessarily asking too many. So the things we'll be measuring are stable housing, of course, but how income and education changes, health and safety, psychosocial well-being, self-acceptance, and positive social connections, and family, including chosen family relationships. And so the short-term host home, just for clarity, that's a safe space 1 to 3 months. It includes host mentoring and wraparound services. So Rocky Samoas and Ryan at Avenues for Homeless Youth have been doing this for a long time. But this new version called the Connect Host Home program is shorter. So it's 1 to 3 months, and that enables them to train 10 hosts on the program in just 4 to 5 months. That's really a fast ramp-up of new hosts. It also provides distance from conflict and combined with counseling of reclaim we think will be really helpful. And of course, it also has intensive case management, really proven host greeting and host training, and the program is deeply embedded in the community. And the family strengthening piece, really quickly, is youth-directed mental health services and case management for family or youth together or separate, and looking at family, chosen family, and kin as a potential resource, and having a function as well over a long period of time. So it's not, like a phone call for 3, fixed sessions, but to have it to be really flexible and a long time support for both the youth and family. So in conclusion, we're really looking forward to scale up these 3 seemingly very effective solutions in 50 communities, developing a national evaluation framework to then publish how each community is working, and then also to improve upon their use as those formative evaluations come out and as those outcome measures come out. We're also really excited about coalescing resources and sharing learnings, having cities mentor each other, but even communities that are not official point source youth cities publishing the data and the findings so that other communities can share them and can learn how these solutions have been implemented so they could do so themselves. So again, 50 cities and towns in now less than 9 years. Great. And the last slide, I think, is just my contact information. So we are looking for partners. We want to continue to expand and work with communities, so feel free to be in touch. And with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Mindy. Thanks again for having me on the call.
Thanks so much, Larry. We're so happy to have you as part of the learning community, and so excited about the work that Point Source is doing and will be doing around the country, and definitely look forward to seeing progress as you guys keep moving forward. Next up, we're going to have some of our great experienced rapid rehousing for youth providers who have been with us throughout the learning community to share with everyone their top lessons learned in implementing youth rapid rehousing. First, we're going to hear from John Lawlor from The Connection in Hartford, Connecticut. I think I said Middletown earlier, John. I'm sorry.
That's right. We're all over the state, so it works. Oh, all right. Can you still hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, perfect. So some of the lessons that we learned, particularly early on in developing our rapid rehousing program, which has been in existence for about 5 years now, probably lesson 1 was to really focus on fostering that relationship between the youth and the case manager, more so than anything else. When we started this program, it definitely wasn't housing first. It came with a lot of, you need to be working when you're actually in the program. You need to meet with staff on a weekly basis. And even our form of rental assistance was income-based. And what we found is that this put the case manager in the position where they had to be the motivator, the constant prompter, to work towards things like employment and to work towards things like engaging with the program of the staff. And it just wasn't a really healthy dynamic. So we made some changes fairly early on where we kind of stripped down the requirements for the program, and particularly the rental assistance. We switched to a graduated payment system where the rental assistance that we pay just gradually decreases in a very realistic manner over time. And we're a program that can go for up to 2 years, so we can gradually step this back. And the shift that we saw occur was that it stopped, the motivator for going to work or going to school or meeting with the case manager stopped being our staff and started being the rest of the world, the real world, the increasing financial responsibility that comes with it. And so there was a dynamic shift that we were able to see. Certainly the case manager was able to see where the youth was more reaching out to the case manager. Hey, I have these bills due. I don't have enough money. What am I going to do? So that was a pretty key shift for us and a change that we were definitely glad that we made. It also changed how we went about supervision with our staff as well. In the early going, it was more about getting people employed, making sure they were making rent payments, etc. Nowadays, it looks completely different. It really is about how do we feel that the relationship that you have with the youth is going. How is the youth feeling about the relationship with the case manager? And that is something that we survey at least quarterly, sometimes weekly if there's indications of a breakdown in engagement. But really keeping that as the primary focus for our direct care staff, and understanding that as long as that develops and that's in place, all the other ducks seem to fall in a row. The employment starts getting there, the income levels start getting there, and they start to get kind of progress towards independence as adults. So that was a big lesson for us. What we've come to realize more recently in bullet point number 2 is the shared housing arrangements. That's becoming a reality for us, particularly with higher priced rent markets. And like a lot of providers, we initially avoided this because of all the anticipated complications that come with it. So what do we do when they start arguing? What do you do if one of the youth exits the lease early and the other one is stuck with it? How do you even work a lease with the landlord with 2 separate youth? And the reason that we started to eventually shift towards encouraging shared living arrangements is just by looking at the data from our discharges. So our discharges over the years, we're housing these youth in these 1-bedroom or efficiency units, but when they discharge, over half the time they're discharging to shared living environments. So that's over half of our youth that were going to live with roommates. And what we'd see is that they kind of check in with us, come back with us with these experiences. Hey, I'm having a difficult time with this roommate. What should I do? And so it's occurred to us is that we've spent 1 to 2 years preparing them to live independently on their own. We have not necessarily spent the time in mentoring and coaching them on how to live with someone else. And knowing that shared living arrangements is very age appropriate. It's kind of a staple for this age range in general, not just with homeless youth and these types of programs. We started to realize that that's something that we probably need to take a look at and explore a little bit more. So right now we are encouraging shared housing arrangements. We're a fairly unique program, a pretty flexible funding source, so it's not that both youth would have to be in our program in order to pursue a roommate situation. We can have, if there's a youth who has a friend who would be interested in moving into a 2-bedroom apartment, we can actually do that. We just only evaluate half of the rent cost and half of the security deposit cost as kind of eligible for subsidy. And it does really shift the case management focus quite a bit, which is a lot of it they end up having to become like relationship counselors and therapists in some way. And then what we found is it's really important to train them to be able to do that. So we have shifted some of our trainings towards stuff like conflict mediation and just trying to get them in a spot where they're prepared to be able to negotiate these terms and these issues that are going to come up. When we do have youth that live together, particularly if they're both in the same, if they're both part of the program, which we do have, we do make it a point to make sure that they get separate case managers, and we have found that that helps quite a bit, is that everyone has their outlet source. And we do our best to try to resist the temptation to solve the roommate problems for them. It's really more about trying to coach the individual youth about, okay, how are they going to bring this issue up with their roommate? Where's their room for compromise? Where do they feel that they actually have to set the boundary? And really just trying to support that self-efficacy piece between the two of them. So shared housing for us is just becoming a reality. Financially, it's become a reality, at least in this particular market. And though it's very difficult to do as a program, you'll get the wildest calls at 1 in the morning, believe me. It is something that's worth it because they're going to have to learn to do it at some point anyway. And in our particular philosophy, we'd just rather them have them try to learn the hard stuff when they're with us, when they have that one-on-one mentoring and coaching at just one call away. And then so last but not least, I'd say one of our, that ties into number 1 a little bit, is to try to find ways to build in incentives and also have bailouts ready. So part of the original philosophy that we had built our program around was that they have to meet with staff weekly, they'd have to work, and that would be the mechanism by which we got them to progress. What we found is that just, as we all know, kind of fosters a little bit more resistance, a little bit more disengagement. So instead, we just started trying to find any way we could to build incentives for good behavior, the stuff that would progress them more towards being a full adult. And so a good amount of it is that we have in our budget built in for rent bailouts, because we know that they're not always going to pay rent on time, particularly early on in it. And the way that we utilize that is that it's not an automatic bailout, but we let them kind of get a bit of a cushioned, safe exposure to the consequence without having to go, let it progress all the way to major, like damage to themselves, eviction, etc. So we use bailouts pretty strategically, so that way it's they can, as I've heard the phrase coined, they can fail safely. They have the mechanism of a safety net to bail out. We also put, in terms of incentives, stuff like letting them pay rent for themselves, setting up a savings account for them where they can pay their rent portion to themselves every month, provided that they're working consistently, kind of meeting with staff. So really trying to find ways to encourage them to progress and develop money management skills and employment skills. And we also incentivize school as much as possible. So for a youth who is willing to go back to school to further their education, we know that that's going to ultimately help them progress in their ability to earn income and ability just to be connected to their community as well. So we will scale back the rental portion that they're supposed to pay quite a bit, even sometimes to them paying nothing, depending on the level of schooling that they're willing to go for if they engage in that. We've also used stuff like gift cards, more immediate reward systems as well for certain youth that seem to need the more of an immediate reward to get them moving. So engagement with mental health providers, substance abuse providers will use small little gift cards for attending appointments, just something to be able to use, kind of take advantage of how they can respond to immediate rewards, which we see that pretty consistently in our youth with really heavy, extensive trauma histories well into their young adolescence. And so I'd say those are the three main highlights. I mean, another big lesson learned is just the importance of building in youth voice into the program design, into the services. Very early on, we established a youth advisory board and really tried to let them create the program as much as possible. Ultimately, they know how to do this best. So really trying to find as many ways as possible to put them in the driver's seat to make that happen, and the rest of the program really does come together. So that's pretty much all I had in terms of the major lessons learned. It's a process. We are still constantly evolving 5 years in, so there's hundreds of lessons learned that I could have added in here. It only gave me 10 minutes, so. But those are pretty much the key highlights I'd say that we hit early on.
Great, thank you so much, John. And just so everyone knows, that typo is my fault and not yours. Have incentivizes. And it's really been great to have the connection as part of a learning community for all of these webinars, and I'm really glad that people are able to learn from the extensive experience that you guys have had. I think everybody kind of realizes that all of you more experienced providers who have been part of the learning community are really in the vanguard across the country, so I'm glad that we have some kind of mechanism for other providers to be able to learn from the lessons that you guys have learned as you've just kind of been building the road as you go. So next up, we're going to hear from Jody Jackson from Heartland Family Service in Omaha, Nebraska. And let's see, do we have Jody on?
Yep, I'm here.
Yay! Okay, take it away, Jody.
Okay. So these were kind of the three that I had as far as lessons learned, things that kind of stuck out to me that we've changed over time since we kind of first began with HBRP. The first area was cost efficiency, or kind of how we manage the financial assistance piece of it. So our project does rapid rehousing services anywhere from 1 to 12 months. 12 months is the cap that we do. We do extensions case by case, rarely, if they're needed. Month by month. And then, oh, let me pull up. I guess I'm missing some of my notes from that. So that's kind of basically what we do with financial assistance. We provide financial assistance in the forms that are eligible for COC and ESG. So we started off with a very flexible where we can kind of help with anything. We have some private foundation money, and we realized that we really didn't need it. Usually all of our costs that we assist with now are either going to be rent, utilities, deposits, transportation assistance. We do bus tickets for people with zero income, and we'll assist with IDs if somebody needs that to get employment or to find housing. But those are the only cost types that we help with, and it's usually not been a problem to find resources in the community for other types of services. So for results with that, so as far as kind of making it cost effective and serving as many people as possible, although we go up to 12 months, our average length of stay is about 4 to 5 months, including the time that they're housing searching. The average total cost, the entire program, all the costs when we break it down by the number of people we serve is a little over $2,000. And about half of that is financial assistance. So we spend $1,064 in financial assistance on average per household. So it's pretty cost effective. We're able to serve a lot of people and turn them over pretty quickly. So that was kind of one big lesson learned as we played with some different ways of doing financial assistance, and that's what seemed to work the best. As far as service provision, I think kind of similar to the first presenter, we started off very in a very different mindset where people were required to spend so many hours job searching and prove to us that they're doing this and doing structured things with their day. And we've completely changed that, and our housing first and trauma-informed is what we do, and we find a lot more success. Our case managers aren't spending time monitoring compliance. They're instead working with clients and motivating them based on what they want to do, which is usually that they want to be self-sufficient. So we've had to change our program agreements and wording and make sure that they're in line with trauma-informed principles, and a lot of training with staff on that. Staffing for the program. That's a big switch. So we used to just have a supervisor and a case manager. The case manager did case management, they did the inspections, they searched for housing, and what we found out that wasn't very effective. So we have now case managers just doing case management. Service provision, they don't have different roles, and they can focus on working with clients on their needs. We have a housing advocate who does our housing search. That has been very effective, so we share them with a couple programs. They do all of the housing search for rapid rehousing, so we have one point in contact for landlords, one person that's daily looking for listings and matching them up. So it's helped us move people in a lot quicker and freed up our case managers' time to focus on case management. And then we have a housing inspector. We have one full-time, but we have multiple programs that use them. So we're able to have a full-time person, but that has been a huge help, having an inspector on staff who does nothing but inspections, and he does an excellent job at them, where some of our social work staff do not enjoy doing housing inspections and don't do the best job at them. So it's kind of our staffing structure that over time seems to have helped us get better outcomes and provide better services. And then, what else am I missing? On the transition plan, like I said, we go to up to 12 months. We also offer aftercare services. So after a client doesn't need the financial assistance anymore, the case manager can keep meeting with them for a few months, usually about 1 to 3 months after they exit. That has been extremely helpful, and the more you can kind of train staff and push them to not just offer that, but really make it happen. So we found it more effective when staff just schedule an appointment right there and continue to follow up, even if the client says, no, I think I'll be okay. We still call, we check in, we try to make sure that that transition goes really well. We find if somebody's not going to pay their rent or gets behind, it's usually going to happen in the first few months after they exit. So that's something we're still continuing to try and improve on. Aftercare planning, so what we've tend to notice if somebody is not going to be successful or struggle a little bit more, if they are not making progress towards getting income or somehow being able to sustain their housing, at about 6 months we start looking at alternatives. So we get them on all of the public housing or Section 8 wait lists and look at all the other housing options so that they're on wait lists. So should they get to 12 months and not be successful in having enough income to pay market rate rent, they're on wait list. So that's been really helpful because it does come through sometimes that their name comes up and they have a subsidy available to them. If we get to about 9 months and we're still not making progress, we start looking at who might be eligible for permanent supportive housing and referring to coordinated entry for those individuals. So we kind of do a little, I guess, a little bit of progressive engagement over time. So the sooner that everyone kind of starts planning ahead, the more options clients have to them, and they don't get to the point that they're timing out with no options available. And then I added some stuff on shared housing because I noticed there was a lot of questions on that. So we probably have a different experience with shared housing because we're lucky enough to be in a housing market where housing is generally affordable and it's available. We're not somewhere that the housing costs are so high that people can't usually afford them. So probably a one-bedroom unit for us is about $500, $550 a month, and is pretty affordable for most people, even on a low income. But some things we have definitely do some shared housing. There are situations that come up with individuals that just met somebody, they want them to move in, they have roommate situations come up. So we leave it up to the client, but it's not something we usually have to push our market a lot just because of our housing market here. But if that's what a client brings to us and they want somebody to move in or they found somebody they want to live with them, we just do a lot of coaching with them on the pros and cons of what those different options could look like, what it could look like if they went on a lease with somebody or if they allowed that person to be occupant, or maybe what does it look like if you wait a few months with this person you just met last week and decide later on if you want them to move in. So we kind of just go through pro and con with them and give them some time to decide and make sure they're talking to the landlord about what they want to do. But that helps, I think, so that we're not in a situation to say yes or no, you can't do this. You can do whatever you would like, and here's some possible things that might happen if you make that decision. Where DV situations come up occasionally, sometimes with these, so a lot of training with staff on safety planning, especially if somebody gets back together with somebody they just recently fled DV from. We try to safety plan. We try to make sure that we are meeting separately with those individuals as well as together, so if concerns come up, people feel comfortable bringing those up. If roommates come up, we try and do roommate agreements if they're willing, and even before they move in, talk through some of the potential issues that could come up with roommates. And then with any of those situations, we always have situations where it dissolves, somebody wants to leave, which sometimes leaves one person with a really high rental cost, or we have two people in the program and we have to figure out who stays in the program as the eligible client, or if they both do and we rehouse one of them, do we rehouse both of them? I don't know that I have a great solution other than it's just case by case. We look at each situation, what seems reasonable, what the landlord's willing to do, and legally kind of what the implications are. So we've done a mix of both. We've stayed with one person, we've ended up rehousing them and kept both people in the program, and then moved the other person to another case manager. We've helped them negotiate with landlords to get out of a lease if they couldn't stay in it. So not great solutions, but it's definitely something that we try to talk with people ahead of time about what the possible outcomes could be, so they're aware before they go into it. That's it. That's all I got.
Thanks so much, Jody. I think you guys might be one of the few places left in the country where housing is still reasonably affordable. So we might all be moving to Omaha soon. And it's been so cool to have the Heartland perspective here on the learning community. Okay, next up we have Kathy Tillotson from Build Futures in Huntington Beach, California. And Kathy, do we have your audio?
You do.
Yay, there you are. Okay, take it away, Kathy.
Okay, we're a little bit different than a lot of the programs that I've spoken earlier. We actually have no public funding, so no funding from city, county, state, federal funding, no large donors. We have no staff. We also have a 3 to 4% rental vacancy rate, very high rents. We have not had a year-round emergency shelter in Orange County until about a month ago, and there's only 300 beds in that, so it's pretty much full already. So our model, well, the reason I say this, other than the fact that things may be different if we had staff or funding, is that we never turn a youth away. So literally every kid who comes to us, if they're, and we do have to put the restriction, they have to be physically, mentally, and legally able to work, but we're very generous on the mentally because we have right now a couple schizophrenics, many bipolars, just about everyone, or large majority have depression, anxiety. So we're very liberal on that. And so we basically feel that every single kid coming to us needs to be housed right away, and that needs to be done the same day or within 24 hours. And to date, for the last 4 years, we've done that. So we've never turned away a kid. That being said, our restrictions are because of housing. So because the housing is so expensive and unavailable, we do use shared housing, but we have to go by what the housing landlords and people will accept. So in other words, they won't accept someone still doing meth and heroin, so we can't. However, last year, 1/3 of the kids we helped were active meth or heroin addicts. So we still house them, and we had about a 50% success rate of them becoming self-sufficient. So we are, and that is, we also have no detox or rehab places that take Medi-Cal. In Orange County, there's about 10 county detox beds. There's no rehab places that take Medi-Cal. So we have a lot of restrictions. However, I bring this point because we still house every youth who comes to us, and we pay week by week, which allows them, I tell them, we can house you, and if you have a problem, one of the biggest, obviously, issues here is to develop housing relationships. So we work with about 75 houses, shared housing. Many of them are sober livings, but a lot of it is based upon that's all there is. So we tell them, we put you in a house and you have a problem at all, just tell us, and we'll look and see what other housing is available. Surprisingly, barely ever do they come back to us and say they want different housing. And always the goal is for them to get employed, and we explain to them ultimately to get your own room to rent. However, doing that in Orange County becomes increasingly difficult. So it is basically a constant communication with the youth, just showing what's available, and these are the choices. Obviously, if we had staff or donors and things like that, we probably would modify some of the things, but it's never going to be an option for us to turn a youth away. That's what we started from day one, and we continue to do that. So to do that and make it successful, our goal is to first house them, obviously. Obviously, like I said, 1/3 of them were active meth or heroin addicts. The majority of them have mental health issues of some sort, lots of trauma, all the things everyone else sees. So I come from a business background, so I developed a very structured step-by-step process of what it takes to go from homelessness to independent living to self-sufficiency. We actually have a Salesforce database where we do a lot of, as much as we can without staff. We have a lot of wonderful volunteers, but we have a lot of data. We work with over 1,000 youth. Last year we helped 255 and housed 108. We obviously use positive engagement and progressive engagement if they can live with a family member, if they can be sent back to whatever state they're from. We do that. So whatever creative things that we can do, host homes would be basically if they know someone who would let them live there if we paid the rent. So we're just very creative and open to anything that would work, so it's unique. Every single individual is unique, and we work with them at their level, but we do have a very structured step-by-step model. So, for instance, we know they all need California ID and Social Security card to work. We also know that the housing is not going to be able to be obtained and maintained unless they have a job. So one of the big things is working towards job readiness. One of the things that we do is we give every youth we work with a book, and you all, if you're not familiar, might want to look at it, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, because as all of you know, their life skills and ability to deal in situations they don't have experience, and well, basically it's self-management, self-awareness, social management, social awareness. There's things they need to work on. So we very much try to get them being aware of those things, and they listen to TED Talks on it. So there's a lot of things involved in our model, and I'm happy to share that with everyone. I obviously can't go into all the many details that are involved in working with this population that we have found, and we're constantly re-engineering our program based upon what we learn. Again, because we have a Salesforce database, we are tracking. We did find last year 75% of the kids who participated in the rapid rehousing became self-sufficient. We're constantly, obviously, wanting to increase that number, but considering that that included the ones who were actually active meth or heroin addicts, it's pretty good. And we actually don't have a time limit on how long they can work with us, because we know that it's a zigzag, up and down, stop, start kind of situation for, I should say, we work with 18 to 24-year-olds, so no minors. So we know that. So we know that, maybe they do okay for 12 months, but then next year they have a problem. So they're always welcome. We always have an open door. We also have an open door, if they drop out, they want to come back, and they know that they're always welcome back. So that's our philosophy, and we take it from the top down, starting from that to how to make it happen. Again, the structured step-by-step program. The shared housing is key, and I had recently a guy, he'd been at least for a full year working at a hospital full-time, doing great. He decided to move back. He was renting a room. He decided to move back into the shared housing because the family, the community, we have a couple really wonderful relationships with housing that it's like a family, even though it's shared room, shared housing. It's very much a family atmosphere, and I would love to have more of that with funding and everything else. So, and that is what they need. And we find the structure is, contrary to them not wanting the structure, is the most critical component of success for them ultimately, because if they are working a job, they have to be there every day at 9. They have to work the whole day, all 8 hours, not just the first 4, not work. So to prepare them for real life and to be independent, they do need to learn, the realities of what's required in the real world. but again, we're always there to support them. And finally, the most important part is the very intense case management that, particularly in the first 2 to 3 months, that we provide, and that covers all facets, life skills, emotional, mental health. Unfortunately, the mental health in Orange County is not as easy to access as we would like, but we feel very strongly as much mental health, substance abuse, support, all those type of things. That is part of our steps to success, all those type of mental health, substance abuse. We strongly, strongly, strongly encourage them to get that kind of help. And I like the idea with more funding of giving them incentives to keep mental health appointments or substance abuse appointments. Many of the houses we work with are sober living, so they actually do require meetings. So that's actually works well, and they understand that that's just the case. I also do have a handful of houses, as I mentioned, that will take kids who are active meth or heroin addicts, which is just a subset of the houses I have, because most houses will not. So we've set up, it's taken, a lot of years. We started in 2009, formed in 2010 to develop all the housing relationships. But we feel we still have a long way to go. There's a lot we could do differently, but we are accumulating data. We are accumulating outcome measurements. We have a lot of information, so I would love to talk to Larry. But I look forward to any questions at all.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing the Build Futures experience with our learning community, Kathy, and we'll look forward to the continued growth that you guys are doing. And next we'll be hearing from Julie Bock from Pathfinders in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Julie, do we have you?
Hello.
Hey.
Well, boy, there have been, I am just amazed at Kathy and John and Jody, and I thank them all for stealing my thunder a little bit, because they all have little pieces of what I think probably all of us have experienced with rapid rehousing for youth. I'm in awe of sort of what Kathy's doing. What an amazing program with a really different kind of structure and a really different kind of funding structure. Q-Block, which is our initial rapid rehousing program, and then we've moved into this year just starting what we call Housing First Case Management. We're in partnership with our county on that. So I don't have a lot of data on that particular program, but I have 7+ years of data on our Q-Block program, which is specialized scattered site rapid rehousing for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning or allied young people, which covers pretty much everybody except for outright bigots. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, and that's sort of where my 3 talking points come from. And the first thing is that really when envisioning rapid rehousing for youth, it's a lot more flexible than people think, and I think they think this really standard, give them, somebody gets a safety deposit, they give their security deposit, they get a couple of months rent, boom, off they go. And what we know is that developmentally often some young people, that's what they need, and boy, that's what we'll give them. But some of the young people we work with, and they are 18 through 25, that's not what they need. And they need longer, they need case management. John talked about looking at the fact that relationship really is key with our young people. And we realize that in a number of ways. Building supportive relationships with the case manager, and we have 1 case manager in our Q-Block program and 1 case manager in our Housing First program. But then we also have mentors. Q-Block was created, I used to call it supported housing meets Big Brothers Big Sisters for LGBT young people, to try to give a 1-sentence elevator speech. But we initially really saw the disconnection of sexual minority youth, that they were disconnected from their family, and so they needed to have help recreating a social web, a social network that would in fact replace the family that had kicked them out. And so our answer to that, acknowledging that that's not what the case manager's role is to have volunteer mentors. And that has been incredibly successful and challenging in the same breath. Because sometimes we don't, I mean, we are a small program. We have, we started out being able to have 25 people housed, but through attrition and funding, right now we're housing about 8 to 10 young people at any one time in our Q Block program. It's hard to say, well, we'll give everybody 5 different assessments to help us figure out how to match mentors. So we do it in a very basic way, utilizing the case manager and our volunteer manager, and the young person and the potential mentor, and that they just meet and they have coffee and they sort of test drive each other and they see if it's gonna work. And that low-key approach has been helpful, I think, in not making it into a really big deal, especially if it doesn't work and somebody says, I just can't connect with this person. It's no harm, no foul, and we move on to another potential mentor. And that has been so helpful that our Housing First case management, we started that program in March. And in July, the Housing First case manager was asking to please also have mentors for her young people who are housed in her program as well. So that flexibility is really important. That feeds into the second point of needing a continuum of housing opportunities. At Pathfinders and with Q Block, we are lucky that we are a runaway and homeless youth serving organization. That means for folks who are under 18, we have an emergency shelter where people can stay up to 3 weeks. And then they also can receive walk-in services, they receive mental health services, and they can move that. That covers the entire time frame all the way up to age 25. So we are able to leverage other programs, our shelter program, as well as our drop-in and our street outreach program. We have a drop-in center that operates 5 days a week, and that's case management as well as showers and food, as well as then our street outreach, which is exactly what it says, 2 folks in a truck, meeting young people where they're at. And all of that is able to wrap around. It is obviously a recruitment for folks to participate in our programs, but it also is a way to say, well, we're going to transition you in, we'll house you, you'll be launched, you're out of Q Block or you're out of Housing First, but you're still connected with our drop-in center, you're still connected with our street outreach program. And so it gives people a continuing connection, which I think is really important. And so in addition to mentors, which we are using in our housing programs, and we're actually instituting that in our drop-in center, we have supportive staff, and we utilize volunteers and interns as well. So there's a cadre of caring adults to wrap themselves around our young adults to support them in their housing, which is really important because housing is important and it's the key, and we need to be creative in terms of looking at what we can utilize, whether that's transitional living, especially through RHY funding, or permanent supported housing, which we find out after we get someone into rapid rehousing and we hit that 4 to 6 month mark, which seems to be our watermark, and we either make the decision of, oh, okay, so then we're going to be able to kind of, transition this person out in a 45-day frame, or we go, oh my gosh, emergent severe and persistent mental health issues, trauma that is unaddressed, past sexual abuse that's unaddressed, that really we don't see that this person, we're going to take the rapid out of rehousing here because we know that they're not going to succeed, and we need to look at other parts of a housing continuum and housing opportunities that are more permanent supported housing, and that can transition people into a program that is more appropriate for their long-term needs. Because we have so many young people who are traumatized, and boy, do we have a lot of individual trauma, and Milwaukee is really starting to talk about community trauma in terms of the violence that has been happening in our community and around the country, and what effect that has on individuals and their ability to move forward, and that really affects their ability to be housed because their trauma response gets in the way of them being able to be stably housed. And so I think that's a really, that actually, other than us attending, Pathfinders attending meetings, we're not originating that conversation, but we're incredibly thankful that that conversation is going on, because to maintain housing, obviously, ultimately, people have to hopefully get to a point in their education where they have graduated high school or attained their GED and looked at something past high school. We know that data shows that a high school education is insufficient to garner a living wage, and so we really work with our young people in terms of educational accessibility. We find that on their own, sometimes it's really hard to navigate, even with really well-meaning technical college folks or university folks. And what we really saw here that has receded somewhat was an emergence probably 2 or 3 years ago, and really sustained for 2 or 3 years, of predatory for-profit secondary educational folks. So now we have a bunch of young people who have a bunch of financial aid debt that we're trying to figure out how to mitigate so that they can re-engage with the educational system. The other piece that we utilize is, because we just didn't see it, we saw the temporary hiring agencies, the Kellys of the world, and they were really cycling our young people through at a 90-day rate and then making sure that they disengage with them before the 90-day and you're eligible to hire piece kicked in. And so we saw lots of our young people succeeding for a while and then inexplicably dropped by their temp employment agencies. So we have created what we call Pathways to Employment. It's our supported employment model, and we laughingly call it in addition to that we are a housing first agency, we are an employment first agency, and we believe that we've been doing the traditional resumes and the traditional mock interviews and role plays, and what we've come to believe that those are all really important, but the way that people learn how to be employed is to employ them and then support them. And so we really have been rolling that out internally. We're doing a community assessment to see what the rest of the community looks at. We're going to be having that data presented next month, by the way, by our young people who have in fact done the community assessment. And then we're going to be seeing which employers externally we can work with. We have some young people who are already test driving it because they found jobs, and so we have entered into some lower level case management and supported employment with them to manage them to see how that's going to go. But we really want to roll this out on a larger scale in 2017, and it's really what young people have asked for. Right now what we've got is an internal cleaning service of young people who are mostly in our housing programs who are going over to our youth shelter, and they are cleaning it top to bottom 2 or 3 times a week, which if anybody runs a shelter, you can imagine exactly what a big task that is. And so we're looking at doing other creative things in terms of working with other youth-serving organizations. We seem to be landing on custodial, possibly is the most low-hanging fruit in terms of figuring out an employable wage. It's a challenge for us, but we think that it's something that we can really focus on. And so that third bullet point in terms of employment and educational support is key to having our young people have stability and housing success, is probably our third piece of what we've learned among many, many things. I think I would end with, even though I think everyone has talked about how you run the program and how you do what you do to serve your young people, what I've found is the key is that relationship piece, because that allows us to individualize what young people need, and then we enter into a relationship with them And we do the business side, but we enter into a relationship with them to find out what they need and work with them to get it. And that's the key to how we have young people who engage with us, and they're willing to tell us when we're doing really well and also when we really didn't hit the mark.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Julie. And thanks for being such a great advocate for Housing First and rapid rehousing for youth, and now Employment First, which I also think is a wonderful idea. It's something that a program here in DC called Friendship Place has been doing for a while, and it's also something that Heartland Alliance has done a lot of work on too. So yeah, I absolutely think that's vital. And next, everybody, Lynn Brockmeyer from the Riverside County, California Department of Mental Health was unable to join us online today, but she did share with us her top lessons learned by email. So I'm just going to read all of those to you now and share with you Lynn's wisdom about this model, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So Lynn's top 3 lessons learned about youth rapid rehousing is thinking about the concepts of empowerment versus just managing. So she says, we as experienced staff at times forget that managing and supporting individuals can be a barrier in itself to empowering someone in handling their day-to-day goals and objectives. It takes more time, energy, and focus to empower them than to just manage the situations ourselves. That's why it's critical for intensive contacts with residents in their homes on a regular, ongoing basis. Empowerment does not mean sending them, though, to do things by themselves. Some might need daily supports and contacts, and at times it can be just a simple, short hello. For other people, it'll be really, truly intensive interventions. Lynn's second big lesson about youth rapid rehousing is that communication is key. She says hearing is not always about listening or understanding. She tells the story of a young man who took our encouragements about decorating his own home however he liked and responded enthusiastically the very next day by tagging his entire apartment, including the ceilings, walls, and floors. And she tells us that many times an individual in a housing crisis has not heard a positive word or expectation spoken about themselves or to them, or especially to others. And when you have lost your sense of self-worth and dignity, or perhaps were even raised without it, positive verbal reinforcement can go a long way. So for Lynn, communication is vital. And finally, her third big lesson about youth rapid rehousing is holding the hope. And she asks us, how can you expect an individual to believe that things can be different in their lives if you don't even hold hope for them that it can? And she says to be careful to not make assumptions that things won't work. And that is it for the presentations from our experienced youth rapid rehousing providers about lessons learned about the model. And next we'll have our provider Q&A. We're going to continue to gather all these lessons and more together in toolkits and briefs that will be added to our Rapid Rehousing for Youth Learning Community webpage that we'll be creating. Now, as always, we're going to take some time to answer questions for all these awesome Rapid Rehousing for Youth folks. Jen has been gathering questions, and you can also continue to enter them in the box to the right on the webinar platform. And I also realized as I was putting these presentations together that I had been lax in my crazy cat lady commitment to put as many cat pictures in my webinars as possible. So I'm going to try to rectify that with my last few slides here. So actually, the first question, Larry, was for you. And a lot of people are interested in learning more about how their communities could potentially become a part of one of those 50 communities in Point Source Youth over the next few years. Is there a process that you guys have, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So we're, scaling up a Point Source Youth, but we're very eager to speak to people, and that's definitely our mission. So the best way is to send an email to myself, Larry, at pointsourceyouth.org. There's also a contact link on our website, pointsourceyouth.org. and then we'll schedule time to do a phone call.
Awesome. Thank you. And I mean, Larry, are there just initial screening things that you're thinking about with communities, or is it just folks that are interested?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so we think there's 3 requirements for a community. The first one is to have a path forward to work with their COC, as typically to scale up rapid rehousing, having support from a COC is key. Kind of off the record, Chicago was one of our first target communities because DePaul, who has 500 of those host homes, had their headquarters there for the U.S., and we found very clearly that we couldn't work with their COC on rapid rehousing for youth. So we are planning on going back there. So the first one is a path forward with the COC. The second one is access to funding. So in addition to the COC, what we've seen works really well is putting together 1 to 3 partners and then do presentations to local philanthropies. So the United Way in Minneapolis was one, for example, and in Baltimore there's Annie E. Casey and Weinberg and others. So that's kind of number 2. And then the third one is, that there's a robust provider or providers that can be a solid foundation for scaling up the interventions. Is there a provider that can do rapid rehousing based on other housing options? Is there a provider that can do short-term host homes? And is there one that can do and scale up the mental health supports for youth? But that's also flexible. So, for example, in Minneapolis, there was one provider for each of those 3 components. In Baltimore, that's the same. But in other cities, it doesn't have to be necessarily 3. So those are the 3 criterion that we look for.
Great. Thank you, Larry. The next question, John, we'll start with you because this question was directed to you, but then I also want to open it up to the other providers. I think you all probably have lots of experience about this, except maybe for Kathy, as we've heard about staffing issues. But John, you talked about the importance of training staff on different approaches. Can you just say a little bit more about what that training looked like and advice for new programs that are just getting started with rapid rehousing and are maybe going to have to go through this now, where staff, particularly frontline staff, has been used to doing something in a certain way and may now have to really shift from a more of a consequences kind of model to a housing first voluntary services, making it engagement kind of model?
Yeah, sure, because that's a universal challenge, and we always have new staff coming on as well, so it's kind of an ongoing one. I will say probably the most important individual training for that would be motivational interviewing. I mean, at its core, that particular technique is not, it's really checking yourself to avoid your opinions, avoid giving any direction, and really just work with what the youth is saying and using a lot of active and reflective listening skills. The other piece that's really key to that is that a lot of the trainings that help you get out of some of those bad habits, they're not necessarily meant to be single-dose trainings. So what we do at our particular agency is that we have had case managers go out and record their conversations with the clients to make sure that our case managers are still following through with avoiding the advice giving, not necessarily putting any undue pressure on the client or giving directives or anything like that, and that they are kind of upholding the principles inherent in motivational interviewing. So really trying to make it not just a training, but a staple of the supervisions. And our supervisions occur weekly in a variety of forms, sometimes individual, sometimes in group. But really trying to find those types of trainings. Trauma-informed care trainings are another one that this tends to be the hallmark as well. But a lot of just ongoing work, making sure that the supervisors who are going to be managing the direct care staff are well versed in it and incorporating it very thoroughly into their supervision as well. And another thing that's really helped us is getting the client feedback about their individual case manager. So we do this a minimum of quarterly, and it's a survey about that asks them how they feel that their case manager is doing with them in a multitude of kind of dimensions, so to speak. But being able to look at that and share that feedback with the case manager. They don't necessarily know which client it's coming from, but they at least know where they're scoring out of this scoring system of 10. So that way they know kind of how to adjust when necessary. And there are some clients where we've gotten those youth who are actually comfortable sharing that directly with the case manager, so that way they learn how to work specifically with the client. Because one thing that we found is even when you get out of the habit of kind of being in the habit of directing people or whatnot, there's still a lot of individual tweaks about how we package the messages, how we package the work and communications. That varies widely by clients. We have some youth that tell us, no, I need you to get on me at certain points, and here are the conditions that I need you to, when it's okay to get on me like that. So really involving the youth as much as possible, both as a whole program but also individually in terms of their feedback, and getting and utilizing that to make sure that periods of disengagement don't occur, and that you got the right matchup too. And I didn't mention in there in the initial segment, but hiring. Hiring is a huge piece for pretty much all these programs. It probably doesn't even matter the type of model we're usually using. It really comes down to that individual that they're working with. So for us, we had started out with a lot of kind of generic case manager hiring questions. Tell me about a time you worked with a difficult client, etc. And people would do okay with those. We eventually turned to our youth and said, okay, what are the qualities that you have noticed you like the most in a case manager, and help us come up with some questions that we can kind of isolate that information from an interviewee. And we've now developed to the point where we have some of our youth that are being served sit in on interviews and ask questions and give us their feedback, because the importance of just getting the right people in the door is key.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. We've been furiously, like as you're talking, making like little bullet notes like, oh yeah, we've got to include that. Oh yeah, we've got to include that when we come out with toolkits. That's great. And then I wonder, either Jody or Julie, can you guys, do you have anything you want to add about just staff shifting, training staff about doing rapid rehousing and how that might look different from what they're used to doing?
Sure, I can. This is Julie. I can take a little whack at that. I think the really important piece is flipping the script on you need to deserve housing. You know, it's that flip to housing first, I believe, is that what makes it successful is that, you know, you have to say there's not anything, you know, someone who deserves housing is someone who is homeless or doesn't have stable housing. That is someone who needs housing. This whole thing about, well, you've got to have money, or you've got to be in school, or you've got to somehow prove that you're worthy is really counterproductive to what our young people need. And then they tell us by their actions that they think that we're full of crap, frankly. And so I think that's the really important piece. In terms of preparing staff is to get them to think about that and get that into their belief system. And then the things that John talked about, like motivational interviewing, we go through harm reduction and we talk about what trauma-informed care is and getting an understanding of that, and the pieces on positive youth development and seeing youth as assets. I mean, we do all of those pieces, as well as we look at our staff composition and our youth composition. There's a real big echo there. We look at, you know, unfortunately, and I'll just go there, our Q-Block staff person is white and straight, and she is serving predominantly young people of color who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. And so that means we have to ensure that there is training around that cultural competency or cultural humility so that we can provide services in a really competent way.
Thank you, Julie, and I'll just tell you, I love it when you go there. And how about Jody at Heartland? For you guys, since you've definitely been doing this for quite a long time, since HBRP days, any additional lessons about staff training and switching to housing first models for staff?
I think they hit a lot of really the high points. I'd say, I guess, with bringing on new staff, there really are no issues. When people come in and they just learn that this is how we do things, I've never had any issues with people accepting housing first or getting on board with that. It's definitely the transition with current staff, if you decide to make that switch, that I think takes the time and selling them on the model and the principles. As far as staff implementing them, I agree motivational interviewing has been hugely helpful. If anybody can get that training to staff, and trauma-informed care, there's tons of workshops and training resources on that, but I think selling the principle is one thing, but giving staff the tools and the skill set to be able to implement it and work with people when we don't really have, you know, a carrot and stick that's going to staff their assistance, but figuring out how to help them reach goals in creative ways. So I think those have been really helpful.
Great, thanks so much, Jody. Another important question that people had, and I think that's something that's really important for all of us to be thinking now, especially in light of the new HUD youth demonstration NOFA and the importance that it places on youth engagement. Can each of you, sorry I didn't prep you for this, but it came up in all the presentations. Can you just talk about maybe a couple of, or one or two lessons learned about youth engagement in your program for folks that maybe haven't developed their own youth advisory boards, and that, especially for COC communities that are going to be applying for the NOFA, that it's a requirement. So just talk about a little bit about your experiences and lessons learned thus far with youth engagement. Kathy, do you want to start us off on that? Have you guys been able to do youth engagement work at Build Futures?
Well, it's actually part of our daily what we do. We don't have any formal thing, but we actually have kids who, since we have sometimes in the office several kids working together, we have kids who will help, you know, kids who've been with us for a little bit will help a newer kid. If someone moves in, because we use multiple, moves into a house and they've been there a while, they'll kind of take them under their wing. They also, they're encouraged because of the relationship. Again, I didn't mention that enough, but the relationship is key. I mean, it all revolves around the relationship you have with the youth. And because of our relationships with the youth, they're pretty, they express their opinions on a regular basis, and we welcome it. We welcome them, and they know that we always we solicit and want to get their opinions. So I guess it's an ongoing thing. It's, ultimately I would like to get to the point of having a group. I find often they get so involved in their own lives just making things done. Sometimes it's hard to get them after they become successful. But I have many of the kids who say that's what they want to do. They want to give back. They want to be, a case manager and help youth. So it's an ongoing thing with us.
Great, thank you. And Jody, how about for you guys, any youth engagement work that happens with Heartland Family Service?
I don't think we have anything specific to the youth that we don't do with our other projects. We do like a client satisfaction survey at discharge and quarterly, and get general program feedback on how the program is going. We also have a formerly homeless individual on our board of directors for our agency, and we have a pretty large multi-service organization. So they sit on our board and have a voting position on the board, which is a COC requirement. Other than that, there's a multi-agency, or there's a foundation that has a whole youth council for anybody that was a former ward. So we try to funnel clients to that giant community collective council, and they do a lot of advocacy, and they do a lot of work in the community. So we don't have our own board or advisory group specifically to our program, but there are some community-based ones that we link our youth with.
Great, thank you. And Julie, how about you? Lessons for youth engagement?
What we find is that our young people want to give back after they've engaged with us, and so a natural outgrowth of that, and the easiest thing to do, is to put together a youth advisory board, which basically is, for us, it looks different in different programs. We're still struggling with trying to get in an agency-wide board. But it basically looks like a meeting on a regular basis. That could be weekly, it could be monthly, and then we literally, it's usually that we have too many people on the advisory board. We're a little bit hard to say no to some people. But then we tell them what we need the advisory board for. Working in the runaway and homeless youth arena is really clear. You're required to have one. We would have one anyway because it's really part of the positive youth development philosophy. And then some of it's just, doing leadership development with them. And then literally they take a look at our policy and procedure manual, and so we try to intersperse it with leadership building for them and the dull stuff that advisory boards do, which is talk about policy and talk about program design, and get real about program design, not, oh, well, I think that we should get a commercial kitchen and start selling cookies or something, which is something that really passionate but not informed young people might say. And so there's sort of like both sides of the coin that we work with.
Great, thank you, Julie. Cookies are always a great idea. Larry, how about, I know it's been just Minneapolis so far, but you guys have stressed from the beginning the importance of youth engagement in the point source work. So any lessons learned in addition to the stuff that you shared with us already about youth engagement?
Yeah, well, I would echo the previous comment where it's important to have the youth advisory board. So in Minneapolis, the link took a lead in doing that for the Connect program. They had some best practices, and one was that we're definitely going to leverage for the other cities. One was they kind of conducted the hiring of the youth advisory board kind of like a regular job interview, and then the advisory board would then interview new and other members. They're also paid, so there's a budget put in to pay them by the hour, and then they have a W-2 and are paid by monthly, just like the other staff. And then because they're paid by the hour, they clamor for more work and even more participation, which is really great to see. And then, yeah, we're definitely building that out so that in the other communities it's done in a similar fashion. So they craft the policies and procedures for each of the interventions. In New York, we're also going to build in time so they can serve as peer mentors as well as youth advisory board members, and definitely a foundational component of the program.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry. And John, how about you? Any last thoughts about youth engagement? You've already shared a whole lot, so any particular lessons learned?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say as much as possible, try to make it fun. We just had one of our youth advisory board meetings last night, and part of it, maybe the first half hour, was talking about program design related issues, and then the other part was actually at a painting bar. And so try to find activities that actually would draw youth in, because the first time we did it, it was at an office, and it was boring, and it was stuffy, and it's basically what most of us working in the field go through every day. And then the other part is also, I just encourage people to not discount the opinions of the youth that don't show up or who don't necessarily can't physically get there in person at an event like an advisory board or whatnot. We do follow-ups with the youth that couldn't make it or who won't go to those on the same issues to get their ideas, because it's their opinions on things are equally as valid as those who are more likely to show up for them. So really just trying to find ways to understand that advisory board can be something that can take place in person, but also really trying to find ways to engage those that just can't make it or won't make it in person as well, to get the whole picture of what your program is.
Thanks so much for that last point, John. I think that's super, super important, that there may be young people who have really great ideas and opinions that can really change our programs, but might not be the ones who just jump up and volunteer to do that kind of work. So thank you all. We are running short on time, so I'm just going to go ahead and go into the last part of the webinar, and that will just be kind of, since this is our last webinar in the learning community for this stage of the learning community, we're going to just give ourselves some time to kind of reflect on lessons that we've learned over the last 6 months. So first of all, for me, the great big lesson was, hey, rapid rehousing for youth can totally work. And within just thinking about that lesson, I just have a couple of things. There's kind of some common related things that we often hear about youth rapid rehousing, and so I just want to address those. The first is that there's no evidence that rapid rehousing works for youth, and also that rapid rehousing is not developmentally appropriate for youth, and therefore youth need transitional housing. So let's establish, first of all, that when we talk about rapid rehousing for youth, when I talk about rapid rehousing for youth, I am not talking about minor youth. We're talking about rapid rehousing for young people of legal age, because for rapid rehousing they have to be able to sign a lease. So first, let's just note, in the context of evidence, if we're talking about a randomized control trial evidence that compares rapid rehousing and transitional housing for youth, or either one of those to just usual care, whatever we mean by that, then no, we don't have that evidence for rapid rehousing for youth, but we also actually don't have it for transitional housing. Most of the evidence that we have about youth transitional housing is from the program evaluation level, and that often only is evidence about successful exiters of those programs. Additionally, most transitional housings haven't historically tracked returns to homelessness, and that's some data that we do have for the HUD-funded rapid rehousing for youth programs. And as we've heard from our more experienced youth rapid rehousing providers here in the learning community, those programs actually are very successful on that outcome, and around, on average, 90% of youth served in these rapid rehousing programs are not experiencing a return to homelessness within a year. And more importantly, though, in this context, is that the evidence that we do have that rapid rehousing works for youth is that there are programs around the country that are actually doing rapid rehousing for youth, for actual youth experiencing homelessness, including youth who are chronically homeless. And these programs have been doing it for years, and as you've heard over the course of the learning community, they're getting great results. So you've been hearing from these providers over the past 6 months, and there's no reason to think that the young people that they're serving in their communities are more developmentally advanced or easier to serve than those in any other communities. I think we can all agree that something that's definitely not developmentally appropriate for young people is being homeless. So rather than dismissing a permanent housing intervention like rapid rehousing as not developmentally appropriate, let's take advantage of the desperately needed increase in funding we've seen for homeless youth over the last year and think about ways that we can ensure that it works best for youth regardless of where they are on their developmental journeys. Something else to think about is that when we talk about transitional housing, that can actually be a lot of different things. Anything from congregate care with 24/7 supervision and lots of rules and high barriers to entry to something that many youth transitional housing providers have actually been doing for years, which is housing in apartments out in the community where the young person takes over the lease at the end of the program. It's called transition in place, and it looks very much like youth rapid rehousing, but I've never heard anyone say about transition in place that it wasn't developmentally appropriate for young people. Indeed, regardless of what the four walls look like, what really seems to be most effective for young people, and what I hear from providers over and over again and from young people themselves, is that great services and supports that help them stabilize their situations, problem solve, connect to both caring people and resources in the community, and develop the skills they need to achieve the goals that are important to them. Those are the things that are most important in serving homeless youth. And we have learned from the great providers that you've heard over these last 6 months that it's absolutely possible to achieve all of those things in the context of rapid rehousing. So I would say to all of us moving forward that rather than focusing on comparing housing models, let's focus on creating more low barrier housing resources for youth and doing the very best we can for the young people in those. My next reflection about youth rapid rehousing from the learning community and all the providers that I've talked to since I've been here at the Alliance is that rapid rehousing is hard, and it's also fun, and it's maddening, and it's rewarding, but it's also really hard. Serving people in crisis, I don't have to tell you all this, but I'll go ahead and say this, it's hard. No matter how you do it, no matter what your program model is, and I know that, I've been there, I've worked in direct services. And the fact that it's even harder for someone to actually be homeless doesn't negate the difficulty of doing this work. But when I was in direct services, I did always find that reminding myself of that fact, that no matter how hard this is for me, it's even harder for someone in the middle of a crisis. That just helped me to maintain my focus on what my clients were telling me they needed as opposed to what I thought they should be doing. I've probably told some of you that I did my direct services work at a very high barrier shelter for families. And to this day, I deeply regret my part in enforcing the hoops that the program made families jump through just to not have to sleep in their cars or sheds or abandoned houses. I wish we had had rapid rehousing in my community when I worked there, which was before HPRP. And all the families that I served then, including the young ones, we did have a lot of young families with little kids, all they really wanted was to just get into their own place, get stable, and get on with their lives. And that's what a good rapid rehousing program helps people experiencing homelessness do. It reduces the amount of time they're on the streets or in shelter, which creates flow through our homelessness system and actually allows us to serve more people. And because rapid rehousing for youth is a housing first model, it allows people experiencing homelessness to direct their partnership with our programs from a place of strength and autonomy rather than from a place in which all the power resides in us to direct their lives, with the consequences of becoming homeless again if they don't adhere to the requirements of our program. And as you've heard from our experienced rapid rehousing for youth providers, following the housing first philosophy in the youth context can be a new experience for many of us, especially for frontline staff. And making a change to that approach, like making any change, is hard. But all of the great rapid rehousing for youth providers that I've gotten to know since I've been at the Alliance have told me over and over and over again that embracing that approach, making that shift to that philosophy has been key to making their rapid rehousing programs work. Everyone agrees that it was hard, especially for frontline staff again, but ultimately they found it rewarding and even inspiring to approach their work with youth from a place that puts the burden for engagement on the program, to make the services engaging for youth, rather than putting the burden on the young person to prove that she wants to engage. Over the course of the learning community, of course, we've heard some great tips from experienced providers about how to make that shift. One of the providers that was part of our earlier practice knowledge project on rapid rehousing for youth had a great phrase, if you make it engaging, they will engage. It's become one of my favorite mantras when thinking about this youth work. And finally, my third lesson, something that's related, is embracing the housing first philosophy is just believing that young people can succeed in rapid rehousing. This is another commonality that I've noticed among all the providers who are doing these really great rapid rehousing for youth programs, and not just for youth, any great rapid rehousing program. They've got some serious PMA going on about their programs. They're committed to just never giving up on their clients. And they go into each case with the belief that the clients can do well and that any apparent setback is just an opportunity for both the client and the program to learn and grow. As somebody who is a big picture evaluation data nerd, that can be really humbling to realize how important something so personal as attitude in our work can be. Ever since I first heard her say it on one of our previous webinars, and something that she said again in the lessons learned that she sent to us, the thing that Lynn Brockmeyer said about holding the hope has been stuck in my head. You know, and she talks so eloquently about if we're coming from a place about fearing putting youth in their own housing as setting them up to fail, you know, she said we just can't have that attitude in the work that we do. because the people that we serve have often been through so many struggles that they may not have any hope left that their lives can be any different. So it's up to us to hold that hope. And I think that hope, that belief that young people can succeed in our programs as long as we let them lead us to the services that they need, that hope is so vital in helping youth succeed in rapid rehousing. So I'm super excited to see how each of your programs and communities enact that hope with youth rapid rehousing going forward. And a final lesson, reflections on our youth learning community for rapid rehousing, is just that we have learned a lot of really practical nuts and bolts implementation of rapid rehousing for youth lessons. Of course, youth are different, but we should keep in mind that they're also not that different. Some of the same lessons that we have learned from using rapid rehousing for veterans and families and older single adults, even those experiencing chronic homelessness, apply equally well to the youth in rapid rehousing context, particularly that it's just more effective and it creates more flow through the system so that we can serve more people. Other universal lessons about rapid rehousing include the importance of landlord engagement and having a housing specialist, if you can, in your program, the importance of being client-led and directed in the case management and tailoring services to the individual, and the importance of connecting clients to mainstream resources to ensure stability after the rapid rehousing assistance ends, especially education, child care for young parents, and employment supports, as we've heard all of the providers talk about today. There are, however, specific tweaks for youth in rapid rehousing that we've learned in each of these core components. First of all, landlord engagement will involve some special conversations when it comes to housing homeless youth with rapid rehousing. And a lot of that may be just educating landlords about things like youth development or dealing with a lack of employment history or bad credit that may have occurred under the youth's name as a result of older family members using the youth's name. It's about educating youth about leases and tenant rights and responsibilities since they may have never lived on their own. Additionally, for financial assistance, youth are on average probably going to need financial assistance longer. And this makes sense because they're just getting started on their employment journeys. And we've heard from all the providers that assistance may need to be more flexible because youth employment may be more unstable, especially in the beginning of being housed. And finally, case management and services for youth in rapid rehousing may need to be more intense than for adults, especially in the beginning. And that also makes sense because, as everyone talked about earlier, young people may have never lived on their own before. They may need a lot more of the basic lessons in tenancy and maintaining a household and preparing meals and how to plunge the toilet, stuff like that. And as all of our providers have mentioned, case management in youth rapid rehousing needs to be super flexible, meeting young people where they are, seeing mistakes as learning opportunities for both youth and staff rather than reasons to exit youth from the program. And those are kind of the big takeaways that Jen and I came up with. So we'll look forward to hearing from all of you about what you've learned about youth rapid rehousing as a result of your participation in the rapid rehousing for youth learning community. So on that note, what's next for our community? Contrary to what this cat would have you believe, our work is not done. So be on the lookout from us for a Google group and listserv invitation so we can all continue the conversation and the knowledge sharing. Additionally, after many, many years, you'll all be happy to hear that the Alliance is updating our website. And once that is done, we'll be creating a single Rapid Rehousing for Youth page that'll include all of the toolkits, webinars, briefs, other helpful information that we've been able to gather over the course of the learning community. And finally, there's a great opportunity to learn more in person from providers and systems folks from around the country about rapid rehousing at our upcoming Families and Youth Conference in Houston, which is going to be held February 23rd and 24th. And if you get there early, our National Youth Forum on Homelessness, which the Alliance co-sponsors and co-facilitates with True Colors Fund, will be having a special listening session for youth providers on the 22nd. And we'll have lots of things to say, I'm sure, about youth engagement. It'll be a great opportunity to hear the perspective of young people with lived experience. You should note that early registration is still open until next Friday, so make sure you register soon, and hey, let Jen and me know that you are coming. And that's all, folks. So thanks so much for being a part of this learning community. Thanks so much for all of the wonderful work that you do for youth experiencing homelessness around the country. It's vital work, and I know how hard it is, and I cannot tell you how much I admire you all for the work that you're doing. Please do keep in touch with me and Jen. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll look forward to hearing about all the kick-ass rapid rehousing for youth work that you're going to be doing in your communities in the coming year. Goodbye, everybody.